Hello, I'm Craig Robinson and welcome to Future Lawyers Network, bringing the law to life. Have you ever thought about how much of an impact the law has on your life? You might not realise it, but wherever you're sitting right now, laws are affecting what you are doing at this very moment. Let's just think about it. You're using a computer. Does it have to comply with any safety standards? Or can any old piece of equipment be chucked together? Are you watching this at home? Are there any laws governing the construction of your house to make sure it's safe, or can anyone build anything? Let's think about the air that we're breathing. It's a lot cleaner now than it was 100 years ago. Is that because factories suddenly realised that pumping out pollutants was a bad thing? Or were they forced to do something about it by environmental regulations? In the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore just how much of a grip the law has on your life, on everything from the things you buy to the games you play, the texts you send, the things you say, and even the clothes you wear. There are all sorts of laws governing young people and work. These cover everything from the sorts of jobs you're allowed to do to how many hours you can work, to the amount you get paid. For example, under the age of 13 are not allowed to work, and if you're aged between 16 to 18, you're entitled to a minimum wage, which is currently at £3.68 per hour. Moving on, B, helping parents around the house. You would have thought that this would be an area that the law stayed out of. After all, we are always hearing politicians saying that how parents bring up their children is a matter for them only. But actually, it's not as simple as that. Suppose the chores the parents are asking you to do weren't just washing up or mowing the lawn, but working in the family shop all evening, or waiting tables, or driving heavy machinery. And what if, because of all the hard work you had to do outside the house, you were then too tired to get up for school, or you had to miss school to get your chores finished? It's precisely to avoid this sort of situation that there is a whole host and bundle of laws designed to prevent children from being taken advantage of by their own parents. Laws ranging from anti-child abuse legislation to compulsory education, even anti-slavery and servitude laws. These are all part of a network of rules and legislation designed to make sure that you aren't just treated as a unit of employment and exploited by your carers or parents. C, buying computer games from a shop. Again, governed by contract, but what about the 18 sticker on the cover? The shop is supposed to check your age if they think you're not old enough. And if they don't check your age, they'll be committing an offence. Okay, so the law tells you that you have to go to school, and your parents can be jailed if they let you bunk off. In 2011, 155 parents were taken to court after consistent non-attendance of lessons and ignoring support offered. Parents face an average fine of £165 if convicted, but they also run the risk of a prison sentence. In actual fact, 15 parents were jailed in 2009.
In the heat of summer, 5 nights in August saw unprecedented violence sweep across our nation. Arson, looting, vandalism and chaos spread like wildfire, starting in London and moving to places like Liverpool, Manchester, West Bromwich and Bristol. 5 people died as a result, and property damage reached an estimated £200 million.
If we're going to talk about what law is or what law does, then a good starting point is to imagine what life might look like if we didn't have any laws at all. One vision is exactly what we saw in the clip. Violence, looting, gang warfare, intimidation, a nightmare world with no safety, just complete chaos and public disorder. In this scenario, we need law to protect us from ourselves. The assumption is that we're naturally greedy and selfish and violent, and so the only thing forcing us to respect other people's rights and other people's properties is the law. But that's not the only view. Other people argue that it's the laws themselves which stop us from acting in a way which is good. Think about it this way. How many times have you done something precisely because your parents have told you not to? There have been some interesting attempts to put this idea into practice. For example, some Dutch and German towns have been experimenting with removing traffic regulations in town centres. So, for example, they have removed all the lane markings, got rid of traffic lights, and taken down all the speed limit signs. The theory is that if someone tells you you're allowed to drive at up to 30 miles per hour, you will drive at 30 miles per hour, regardless of whether that's safe or not. Take away those signs, and you as a driver will have to take personal responsibility for making sure you are driving safely. And the result? the number of accidents actually fell. Now, there could be all sorts of reasons for this, but some people say it's proof that fewer laws would make for a better, not worse society. A Dutch traffic guru who is credited with suggesting this approach is Hans Monderman. Hans Monderman put it like this: the greater the number of prescriptions or rules, the more people's sense of personal responsibility dwindles. So we've talked a little bit about what law is there to do. Let's now take a look at our second clip, and while you're watching it, think about why I might be showing it to you.
Tottenham MP David Lammy has contrasted the long prison sentences handed out to rioters with the treatment of bankers involved in illegally fixing interest rates on loans they have made to each other in order to avoid big losses. During the riots, the court stayed open through the night to process people arrested during the riots, and there was criticism that some of the sentences were too harsh. Lammy made the connection between the apparent lack of punishment of wealthy bankers and the prison sentences handed down to rioters. As Lammy said, there is a sense that we punish the poorest hardest. Have we opened up our courts and had them running through the night for bankers?
Moving on, so when people talk about the law, they try to identify certain key principles which always apply. One of these key principles is the idea that the law is the same for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire banker, an MP, or an unemployed teenager, the law will be applied in exactly the same way. But is David Lammy right in suggesting that the law treats different people in different ways? Moving on, what we've seen so far is that different people have different views about what the role of law in society is. We've seen that some people would argue that we could do with fewer laws, and we've seen that people expect the law to treat everyone in the same way. And you might even say that wherever you have rules, even in schools or in the sports field, you expect them to be applied fairly, equally and judiciously. And I'm sure you've experienced that strong feeling of injustice when they're not applied fairly or equally. Okay, well, with all this in mind, let's take a look at our final clip.
A 21-year-old student at Swansea University was jailed for 56 days for sickening tweets which mocked footballer Fabrice Muamba moments after he'd collapsed on the pitch after having a heart attack. Liam Stacey's tweets provoked a wave of revulsion, and police were inundated with complaints. Claiming he was drunk at the time he sent the tweets, Stacey nevertheless admitted to inciting racial hatred and was sent to prison for 56 days.
So when it comes to deciding how you're going to behave, maybe it's more than just the fear of the law that forces you to act in a particular way. Maybe it has something to do with your own sense of morals, values, and community and decency. Just think about how many times you've queued for a bus or a gig. There's no law telling you that you need to queue, but just think about how you feel when you see someone else barging past you and pushing their way to the front. It may not be the law that is telling you this is wrong, but it is a social convention, a social custom, a norm. So having looked at what law tries to do, talked about how laws are applied in different circumstances, and thought about how all-encompassing law is, what sort of general conclusions can we make about the law? Well, let's see if I can lay it out for you in a way that is relatively easy to digest. First, law is a body of rules, and for them to mean anything to anyone, they have to be described somewhere, written down, recorded, available to see. If you come to study law, you'll find out that the law of England and Wales can be found in a whole host of different places, from Acts of Parliament to judgments in famous cases, case law, to international treaties, to local council bylaws. And because laws are written down in a variety of places, and there are so many of them, you need people who are skilled at knowing where they are and what they mean, and that's where lawyers come in. Secondly, there has to be an element of compulsion for a law to be effective. So what do I mean by this? Well, if no one is prepared to enforce a law, what's the point of having it? For example, when you come to study constitutional law, the law relating to how we govern ourselves, you'll find that it's often said that Parliament can make any laws that it likes. So in theory, there is nothing to stop Parliament from passing a law which bans construction of nuclear power stations on the north coast of France. But unless we're prepared to do something about it, like put up an invading army to take over and run France to make sure this doesn't happen, what would be the point? Which brings me on to my final point. And that is, if laws require compulsion to be effective, there has to be a mechanism for enforcement. And that means having people whose job it is to do the enforcing, like a police force, an army, judges, barristers, solicitors, and people like environmental health officers. Even some charities like the RSPCA have been given powers by Parliament to enforce certain laws relating to animal cruelty. The list is huge, the list is endless, but it needs to be if we hope to keep law and order. So when I came to look around for a short definition of what a law is, I came across this one which I think works well, and it's simply this. Law is a body of rules imposed and enforced among members of a given state. It's not the only definition, and perhaps you can find one that is more provocative. Perhaps law is a body of rules to keep the rich rich and the poor poor, to preserve the status quo. We're all out of time, but thanks for joining us at the Future Lawyers Network. I hope we brought the law to life a little for you today, and we look forward to hearing from you, so keep in touch. Finally, for anyone who is interested in staying online a bit longer, I'll be on hand to chat for the next 10 minutes to answer any of your questions you may have, so stick around if you can, because I'd love to hear from you. But for everyone else, goodbye, and we hope to see you again soon.